Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is 5 o'clock. We're going to get started on time. Just want to thank you all for being here to learn more about this situation and hear from the experts that we have here this evening from the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. We do appreciate the City of Peru allowing us to have the meeting here. They've got the AV capabilities, and the meeting is being recorded so that folks who are not able to be here this evening can watch it in the future and benefit from the information. I want to introduce the experts that we have here tonight from IDEM. We have Kevin Davis, who is the IDEM Remediation Section Services Branch Chief, Bill Holland, who's the Voluntary Remediation Program Section Chief, Chelsea Day, who's the VRP Project Manager, and also Alan Carter, who is in communications with IDEM. So they're going to give us a presentation and then take questions. A couple of notes. We're going to accept written questions this evening. IDEM's been kind enough to provide forms for that. We do have those available out in the hallway, and we can pass those around during the presentation. If you'd like to ask a question, just write your name down and your question on the paper, and then Chelsea and I will help collect those after the presentation to get those answered. A couple of thoughts on some ground rules for tonight. So this is not a public meeting in the legal sense. This is informational. I put this together by asking IDEM to come and provide information and take questions. And I'm going to say this up front. If we see any type of behavior, like we saw at the City Council meeting a couple of months ago, the violator or violators will be asked to leave. We're not going to allow one person or a small group of people to ruin a meeting where all of us can benefit from the information. There's no one in this room tonight who's done anything wrong, no one to be mad at. No one caused this problem. It started 100 years ago. Now we're dealing with it. That's why we're all here. These good people with IDEM, they work for us. They work for all Hoosiers. It's their job to make sure that Schneider does what they have to do to solve this problem and clean up this contamination. They do this every day, and they're the experts. So tonight's not a night to ask legal questions, point fingers, make political statements, any of that stuff. We're not going to do it. There's no reason for it. This is about learning what the situation is, what's being done about it, and what will be done about it in the future. So if you have questions, again, please write them down. We'll get them answered. And I hope we'll have a respectful and factual conversation tonight. Everybody good with that? Great. Thank you so much again for being here. I'm glad we agree. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Bill Holland with IDEM. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. I don't do this that often, so bear with me a little bit. I've worked in the voluntary remediation program for 18 years, and I've been the section chief for the last 6 years, and I've actually been at IDEM for 29 years. So a lot of experience, and I didn't even start till I was in my 30s, so I had experience with business and stuff before I came to do this. I want to talk a little bit about the voluntary remediation program. I know people are like, why this program? And so this program was set up by the legislature in 1991 to allow sites to come in and to be beneficially reused and to offer an opportunity for people. We don't get any money from the legislature. We're funded by, we bill for our time for these sites. And to come into my program, you also have to be self-funded. So, you know, when people talk about Superfund or whatever, Superfund is really a mechanism to get money to clean up sites. In this case, Schneider is paying us to review the sites and also to do all the work. So we have a memo of agreement with the EPA, and they've looked at our guidelines for how we do our cleanups. We use the same numbers as the EPA. So they also always have the ability right there, the federal or the state, they could always come in and ask questions of us. They do on a small percentage of our sites. They kind of, but usually we're in the lead. Like the idea is that IDEM kind of drives the bus, and then other people can kind of tell us about that. So Schneider approached us in December of 21 and applied, and we have a process that we go through before we accept them, and you can't be in enforcement for the actions that you're coming in for. So that's one criteria, and then there's also criteria eminent and substantial threat. So neither of those were seen at that time, so they were approved in the program. They signed a voluntary remediation agreement in February of 22, and that agreement lays out a schedule for doing this work. So right now, they agreed to get delineated in 2 years. So that's the goal. And some things can, and I think we're still on track, but things can sometimes turn out to either be more complex than we thought, or they run into obstacles, which hopefully, I think we've overcome some of our access issues, but other things can. But our goal is to monitor them closely and make sure that we get delineated within 2 years. And that's a big key, right, for everybody in the room. We want to know exactly what the contaminants are, where they are, and if anybody can be potentially exposed, right? That's the first thing we do. And then once we determine that they're completed their delineation, then we request that they submit a work plan, and that's, how are you going to fix it? So in this case, they've already started to do some things on site to fix it. They're talking about even doing some things in the next coming weeks to possibly start reducing mass in the plume just off-site. We just got these details yesterday, today? This morning. So we're still kind of looking through that, but they've indicated that they could sort of start that in the next few weeks. So on the one end, we're going to be kind of following. We're good to Water Street. We're delineated, right? So we kind of have an ellipse like this of the plume, and so then now we need to go and find the full extent of the plume. So what we talk about is the nature and extent of the plume. So that's the next big thing that we're going to spend these next months, and hopefully by January, February of next year, we'll be able to say the plume is completely delineated, and then we will have a plan. Once we get a plan and IDEM approves it, so we'll feel good about everywhere the contamination is, and we'll feel good about what the proposed remedy is, then we will approve it. But before it's formally approved, we'll have another public comment period where everybody's welcome to comment. All comments will be considered. There's even an opportunity to request a public hearing, which is kind of the more formal process where you have a court reporter and you come up and put your comments on the record, and we will address those. So we're still, from the VRP perspective, kind of in the first third to middle. And then, once they do the remedy, there'll probably be at least a 2-year monitoring program where we're going to look at what the remedy was and did, and then we're going to keep continuing to look at the groundwater and see where our levels are, and whether their remedy worked, essentially, before we give them closure. And there's always opportunity to comment to us. People, just because there's a comment period, you can always, and I know several people have already reached out to Chelsea, but we're always willing to take comments. We understand the plume is, under people's neighborhoods, and that people have questions, and we're more than happy to answer those. We do have the virtual file cabinet. All our documents are available for review. If anybody has questions, from that, we're certainly happy to take them. We're just, hey, what are they doing? We're certainly happy to address that. And then once, so also the remediation work plan decision is appealable. And then when we go to closure, that decision is also appealable. So if we decide, the statute says if they do the plan according to how they proposed it to us and we approved it, that they will get closure. And so that involves getting a certificate of completion from IDEM, and then ultimately a covenant not to sue from the governor's office. So, but that decision is also appealable. So there are a lot of opportunities to comment. We're still have things to do. There's still things we don't know. The plume is kind of changing. There's breakdown. And I guess I'm getting into Kevin's talk. So I will let him take over. This is Kevin Davis, my boss.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here. I know it's cutting into your dinner time, but you know, it's interesting stuff. I am fascinated by this. One of the reasons I'm doing the part about the investigation is that I'm a geologist. I'm a licensed geologist within the state of Indiana. I originally started my life after Indiana University. I see a Ball State. Any Purdue people here? Okay, you're accepted. But I am a geologist in the state of Indiana. And so when I first started out, I was in environmental consulting for 4 years with a large company, Groundwater Technology, which then got bought out by Florida Annual and IT, and then 1 year on my own before I came to the state of Indiana. I've been with the state. This is year 29. I was originally going to come for 5 years, but during that time frame, it turned out that I really liked my job. I was a technical support person in the geology group for doing remediation on investigation remediation on sites. So I've stuck with it. I'm now currently, as I said, the Remediation Services Branch Chief, which incorporates voluntary remediation program, the state cleanup program, our federal programs, which is site investigation and Superfund, as well as our Defense Department sites, which of Grissom is one of those, Air Force Base. So that's overall what I do. And so I'm very interested. So if I get a little too deep into rocks and dirt, I'm sorry, because I'm really interested in that, but I hope that you are too. But I just kind of wanted to show you, this large map here. And can everybody see it? Okay. So questions have come up, and we've selected these maps to help with some of the questions that Chelsea has been receiving. She's been receiving phone calls from people that live here within the community, and she's been answering those. And so we've selected maps to kind of answer some of these questions. One of the questions is, what are they doing? Are they doing enough? One of the things that popped up was, for example, the old pond area, the borrow pit that they filled in. I've got a figure on that. It's on the back side of one of these drawings, and I'll show you shortly. But here's what they've been doing on site. These are all individual. This is the old borrow pit area. These are all individual locations where either a soil boring, a monitoring well, a soil gas vapor point, or a trench has been dug to identify the waste that was there. From this, they've determined that overall, here's lithology, what's going on. I've got a map, called a bird's eye aerial view that it's actually in the Library of Congress if you want to look at it. It's online, and you can pull it up, and what it does is it shows the Peru community back from, I do believe, 1886. It's kind of cool. And from it, it shows that there's higher ground in one area than another. There's been a lot of fill over the years. A lot of landscape is no longer as hilly as it once was. It was leveled to make nice level ground. And that's what's happened. Burrows have happened and fill in other areas. And from that, they've determined, both from GPR as well as their borings, that there is basically a natural feature at the bottom of this where the groundwater seems to go flowing out the corner, okay? And from there, which is the southeast corner right here, which is also represented by the area of concern that we have depicted on here with the homes, okay? So groundwater is flowing out from here. They have several source locations on the plant, one primarily here and then one farther up, where the groundwater is carrying that contamination in the groundwater out and under at this location, okay? The concerns are, for the site itself, they look for soils. It's not pulling contaminated soils out to the neighborhoods. It's only in the groundwater, and we're concerned about contaminated groundwater that people, one, would be drinking it, or two, they would be exposed to it in some way. Well, you know, there's not like a swimming pool there or a pond there that people would have exposure to. Or the drinking water wells if they were in this location. And lastly would be soil vapor, okay? Because we have, it's called chlorinated compounds. They're basically chemicals made with chlorine in them, okay? The chemicals of concern here primarily are TCE, okay, as well as its breakdown products, cis-DCE, and vinyl chloride is one of them. And then after that breaks down, it goes to an ethane, and at that point, it isn't considered harmful at toxic levels. There aren't toxic levels for it. So what we've seen overall, and some of the discussion and documents that have been submitted to IDEM have shown that it appears that we've got releases here that are very old. As Representative Manning had mentioned, this didn't happen overnight. We're talking, this is a 100-plus-year-old manufacturing facility. Started out as Square D, and then it evolved into Schneider purchasing it in 1991. If I remember correctly, and them operating the facility to 1920, in that right around 19 and 20. So what's happened is they have found from their operations that in the past they have used chlorinated compounds to clean metal or whatever. Oftentimes it's for painting. You'll go ahead and use a chlorinated compound because anybody here work on brakes on cars other than me? You can go out and buy the two cans. One's red and one's green. Okay, the green is more of a non-chlorinated compound. The red is a chlorinated compound. The red, what it does is it strips metal clean. I mean, absolutely clean. So you're then available for, like, let's just say, the electrical panels that they made here. You would strip that metal clean with a chlorinated compound so that paint would adhere to it perfectly, okay? Because you don't want any grease left over from a manufacturing operation because you can't paint it. The paint will eventually come off.
You mentioned chlorinated compounds where dioxins test for.
Bart, this is the presentation period. Questions will be written after this.
And so what has happened is they've had concentrations that have leaked into the soil, and from there it has gone out. Based upon the concentrations we're seeing and the breakdown products, it is an old plume. We're talking 70s. Now, could it happen up into the 2000s? Sure. But overall, if you're releasing TCE, it's got to break down into several products. And when you start seeing those end products, it's a very slow process. And that's when you start seeing these end results of cis DCE, as well as you're getting down to vinyl chloride. So this is the direction of the groundwater flow based upon all the borings that were done, both in this area and around this area, located along here. They've identified that this is the area where the contamination is headed, as well as the groundwater flow direction. They match up. From here, you go into the neighborhood, and this is the key area right here. You notice all these points listed as soil borings. Then you've got groundwater sampling points, you've got vapor sampling points, you've got sewer sampling points. Those are all to see the extent of the groundwater plume of which there might be concerns for vapor. Early on, when they found groundwater concentrations here, this little core area here became the area of interest associated with that groundwater contamination, that there might be a vapor concern. They subsequently, from additional borings, have decided to expand that. Originally, they were going to only look at 1 to 2 homes. It's now been expanded to this area based upon the data that's been collected. So of those, they've gone through and sampled them. It took a long time in terms of getting that permission, but they did eventually get permission for all the homes they were interested in sampling, if I remember correctly. All of them? Which ones? We're missing a couple? Okay. They've gotten permission to sample these, and then they sampled down here. These here have not received permission yet. One of the things we do as a state agency is, if these residents are here and they want to be sampled, everybody likes information. You guys are here because you want information. We can give you that information. But what I can't get you is data that's not collected, okay? We always encourage that data be collected so that you know. uncertainty is not good for anyone, okay? We don't like uncertainty because we want it to be defined and so it can be addressed. We want this taken care of, okay? So if you're here, it would be helpful if you could provide the permission, but I know there are reasons. Some people don't want other people in their house, and that's okay, but I just want to let you know that, you know, we always encourage participation so that you can get the information you need for your own personal needs, as well as what we need to get this correct, okay? Information is always good, okay? That's why you're here. We're trying to give you the information you need, and that's always good. And that's why I like seeing a crowd like this, because that means you care, and you want to know, and you're here to know. And that's what this is about, really. So we have basically this channel that goes out here through the deep points, where it's headed out into that southeast corner there. Let me flip this around. Here are the identified source locations. Now, because this is floated up above, you really don't have, it sits on here. So this green is actually in this area. So it went down here and is going out the corner. Here's the areas where they found the contamination, and these are the groundwater flow lines, okay, that have been done through putting in wells, surveying the top, measuring how far it is all the way down to the 10th of a foot, and then going ahead and measuring out where that groundwater is going, okay? Goes from high to low, just like going down a hill. Now, there have been some questions concerning the Barrow area, which was located in the middle western portion of the plant, right here, okay? And that it became a fill area for different amounts of trash and everything. First thing you do is typically you do a non-investigative thing where you don't drill into the ground. You do some sort of survey, whether it be an electromagnetic survey or it's a ground penetrating radar. This here is the ground penetrating radar, and the signals it gave back of all the subsurface reflections back from that. It shows this kind of pockmarky area. It shows it's a fill area for the most part. You can also see utilities. You can see those lines. If there were underground storage tanks, they'd show up as an underground storage tank. It's kind of cool. I've been out at sites doing these. And then from there, once they determine what they've got, they went ahead and put in borrow pits, and they're listed as borrows here, as well as soil borings to see what's in there and to sample the materials that they're getting, okay? So you get a handle on what's there. Is it hazardous? Is it a problem, okay? And so that's the information they were collecting at the borrow pit. Because I know there were questions that have come through, well, have they looked at this? What have they done, if they've done anything? So this is what they've done. We have all these documents, as Bill mentioned, in our virtual file cabinet.
They sampled the groundwater around it.
And the groundwater at the same time.
Escaping it. And they're also going to put dig restrictions on it so that in the future, if somebody's over there and doing a trench for a sewer or building footers or something and they encounter something, that will be properly managed. They will determine whether it's a true waste and, you know, have to be disposed of properly at that time. So they're not, going forward, they're not, you know, just writing it off. They're going to have to continually manage it in the future.
So this is the work that's been done up in the fill area, and you can see the work that's been done within the plant itself. The discussions that they've provided us with, as well as documents as soon as this morning, they've laid out a schedule of things they're looking to do. They've got something called a soil vapor extraction system working on the plant area itself in the area of highest volatile compound contamination. From that, they're not discharging it straight into the air. They've got a carbon filter on it, so it captures those volatiles, and then that carbon, once it has everything and then needs to be sent off to be recharged and new carbon put in, okay? So that's what's going on. It's an SVE system that's currently going on at the plant. We have been told, and plans do change, that they're looking to expand the SVE system off-site. Now that involves a couple things, permissions and/or property acquisition. So they're looking to expand an SVE system, a soil vapor extraction system, and what that does, it pulls the vapors out of the soil. So if you get volatilization coming off out of this groundwater, it will pull those vapors, capture them within the carbon, and then they're disposed of, and it gets recharged. Typically, I think Calgon is one of the ones who recharges carbon, activated carbon. Usually it's done through incineration, and then the carbon is refreshed, and it can come right back to where it came from. The second thing that we have been told, we've not received the documents on that, but this morning they provided us with some information that they're going to do something called air sparge. Air sparge is essentially you're taking a tube and putting it into the groundwater at depth, put a compressor on it, and you're bubbling water up through you're bubbling air up through the water column. And what that does is volatile organics means they like to volatilize into air. So what that does is it will take those compounds out of the groundwater and let it be captured by the SVE system and then captured within the carbon. So they are looking to do a test location for the sparge system, and that will be coming up here shortly. So we have some information concerning schedules. Hand me that paper right there. They're going to put in the SVE off-site pilot SVE wells March 6th through 10th. Air sparge testing later on in March 13th through 17th, and tracer testing to determine the radius of influence of that sparge system. Because what it does is it bubbles up a certain amount, but as it bubbles out, it bubbles out, okay? You get a spread. And what they do with the tracer test is they determine how far it spreads. And what they want to do is be able to put it along the entire width of the plume, as well as the depth, to capture those contaminants within it, to clean it up, okay? That's what the goal is here. So that's essentially what we got in terms of the investigation. They submit their documentation to us, and as Bill mentioned, it's in our virtual file cabinet, which is available online. Anybody with a home computer or a smartphone can access our virtual file cabinet. We have a website dedicated to just Peru, this site that you can type in on Google, IDEM Peru or IDEM Schneider, and it will take you exactly to our fact sheet as well as our webpage, and you can get links to the documentation. You can get all sorts of things there to help provide you with information you are seeking. So you don't have to go off of, well, I don't know, or I have heard from somebody, but I've heard something different from somebody else, or social media said this. It may or may not be correct. But what we've got is basically the record of what they've done and what they intend on doing with their work plans that they've submitted to us. Those work plans, once they come in, it's just not Chelsea's job to look at these documents and say, oh yeah, I think this is okay. No, those are sent off to our technical support group. We have professional geologists at the agency. We have professional chemists at the agency. We have professional GIS people at the agency. We have all these people, as well as engineers and others, to look at documentation to say, is this right or is this not right? When I was a technical support person within the geology section for the remediation branch, I literally would look at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. I probably, in my 9 years within the program, probably looked at a couple thousand sites within the state of Indiana. So it's my job as a technical support person, or when I was a technical support person, to look at it and say, is this right? Did they put it in the right location? Are they sampling for the right things? Are they sampling correctly? Are they sampling at the right depth? Is there enough points there for me to put the picture together to get a holistic picture? Do I have any gaps, such as those couple of homes there that we were looking at here? And in the end, it's like, okay, do I really need those based upon all the other information I got? Do I really need those data points, and do these other ones substitute enough that it fills out the picture for me so that we can get to the point of remediation? Typically, remediation is done when you're done with the plume. Once you've delineated the plume, you then start your remediation. In this instance, Schneider has gone ahead and started doing remediation on-site and is looking to start it off-site before they get to the point of sending their documents to us, requesting the remediation they want to perform. It is a voluntary program. Even in our enforcement programs, you are allowed to go ahead and do things to make something better ahead of schedule, okay? The risk they run is that they may do something that is inadequate or may be contrary to making it better, okay? That's something that we try to keep a close eye on because we don't want that happening. We don't want somebody pushing a plume some direction, okay? You don't push a plume when you're doing SVE, but that's neither here nor there. So overall, this is what's kind of going on. I did want to make sure, and Chelsea provided sheets out there with a QR code. You can scan that, and what that'll do is it'll put you on our mailing list, and as our updates to our website, it'll send you, say, hey, there's a new thing on here, you might want to check it out. It's automatic. So that's why we've requested email addresses on the sign-in and everything like that, or the QR codes. So. In terms of, we've had a question like, I can't trust Schneider or their consultant. I don't know that they're doing the right thing. IDEM provides an oversight program. Schneider has hired ERM. It is a well-known, very large engineering and consulting firm that does environmental consulting. They have a very good reputation. They run independent, although they have been tasked with they will have to submit budgets to Schneider to do the work, and then they get signed up and contracts get filled out and everything like that. As we do our oversight, where we feel there are questions, or if we have certain questions concerning potential validity of anything, we go out and do something what's called a split sample. In this instance, some questions came up about ERM, that they may be, they're employed by Schneider, so therefore, how can I rely on what they're doing? We went out there and did a groundwater sampling split sample with them. What that means is we go on site when they are collecting those groundwater samples. They take part of the sample, we take part of the sample. They send it off to their contracted lab, we send it off to our contracted lab. Then those results come in. Then we say, okay, give me your results, okay? We want to compare them to ours. And so we did. We got those results. What we're dealing with here is in the parts per billion, okay? There's part per part, okay? And then you got 10,000, 100,000. We deal a lot in parts per million for soil and parts per billion for groundwater, okay? For most compounds, there's a few compounds that actually go into the parts per trillion, okay? So what we did is we took their results that they had analyzed. They send them off as one set of numbers. We send ours off as LAs. Our lab analysis are all LA, some random number. We take those back, we figure out what location those LA numbers correlate to, then we correlate to them. And what we found, okay, part per billion is 3 drops in an Olympic pool, 3 drops of water within of contaminant within an Olympic-sized swimming pool. 3 drops. Our results matched up extremely well with their results, okay? So they collected and sent and laboratory analyzed theirs. We did the same. It's beyond, because they don't know what our results are, and we waited until we got theirs. They can't fake those results. They matched up. We will be providing those results online once we get our final from our chemists, our final memo, okay? Because all these pieces of data come in, we have to have our professional technical people look at them and say, these are valid or these are not valid. And we're waiting on that memo. There's a couple other things from indoor air samples. I think we're still waiting on our memos from our chemists. But overall, some of the results for the homes, for people that are here, we have not found anything within the living spaces above our numbers that we have in our remediation closure guide. We have what's called Table 1, where it shows numbers there, and those are parts per billion number. When you're dealing, it depends on the scenario. When you're dealing, there's multiple different numbers. For example, OSHA has one set of numbers for worker safety. EPA has a set of numbers, and we use EPA's numbers. OSHA's numbers are in the parts per million. Our numbers in the parts per billion. Okay, we have a lot of conservative assumptions based within those numbers. It's for elderly people, it's for pregnant women, and it's for children. We allow for those so that the exposure, so our numbers are multiple orders of magnitude below the other ones. So we are very, 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 very conservative on it, because here's the deal. From our standpoint, we don't work for the state for glory. We came to make a better difference. I want this state to be better for my children and everybody else's children. And I think over the years that I've been able to achieve that, and I'm going to do that until I retire. And we're bringing up a younger group behind us that have the same drive to make this a better place too. Nobody wants to be within an area of contamination. Nobody. And I don't want to see anybody in that. I don't want exposures to happen, and we're here as an agency, as a state who has dedicated themselves to getting you people a clean environment, a healthy state to live in. That's our goal. That is our job. That is our one job. And that's one thing I always try to tell the new people. You know, we are here for one reason, to make it better and make people safe. Yeah, there's bureaucracy this or there's something that. Let's make it safe. Let's go forward. Right now, that's all I've got in terms of what we've got here. Have we got some of the questions? Yes. Anybody want to take a short break? I've been told the restrooms are on the right over here, and we can go ahead and collect any questions that you have.
The forms were never passed out. We get the forms.
Oh, you probably made it in before they were out here. Sorry. If anybody wants, we'll take like a little 5 minutes here if anybody needs to hit the restroom. I'm going to take a drink real quick because I'll get hoarse otherwise and start coughing.
Do you have an extra blank form?
I just wanted to let you know the reason we're doing the questions on the forms. It gives everybody an opportunity then to get their questions answered. I've been at public information sessions before where we've taken questions from the audience, and it can tend to get heated between people trying to ask one question over another, and there's oftentimes 1 to 2 people who use up a lot of time, and then people leave unhappy because they never had an opportunity to ask their question. So I want everybody to have that opportunity. We're going to be hanging back after we go through these questions, and if people want to come up and talk to us, look closer at the maps, go for it. We're here to answer the questions. We're doing pretty good time-wise. I think we're here till 7 tonight. We tried to schedule it so that we could get people before they go to a night shift, and then also people who are getting off work. Unfortunately, usually that's dinner time for both, but we try to stretch it out so that we can capture both ends. And I think very successful by Representative Manning in getting this set up here. A little bit small. We're short a couple of chairs, it looks like, but can everyone see this adequately? Because this is really the one that shows the biggest overall picture of the investigation that's been conducted. I just want to make sure. I know this area is kind of a little darker, and not as much light over here, so I couldn't tell if you really can see it enough or if I need to move it forward for you.
Thank you.
So you're aware, these maps are also within the documents we have contained on the virtual file cabinet. So just a little FYI. This one here is the most recent version. We requested it specifically for tonight. We had an older version in a document that left off some of the most recent data they've been collecting within the last few weeks, the data points. So so that's where this one, and you may not find this one online yet, but it'll be coming. All the rest of these were taken from reports that have already been submitted. So
Just stay over there for just a second, please.
all right, just another minute or two.
Kevin, you might talk about, while we're waiting on questions, when you and I talked previously, you'd said that VRP was your highest level of oversight. So maybe talk about that and maybe how many sites statewide there are in VRP.
All right, I can do this in the interim. Yes, VRP has our highest level of oversight, okay, because we want to get it right. Because at the end, there is a covenant issued or signed by the governor. We want those investigations and remediation and closures to be ironclad at that point. We are, the right word really is loath to say, no, this was incorrect, and have to go back to a site 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, how many years later, and say, oh, this was missed. We don't want that happening. So we do look at them extra intensely. Our other program, State Cleanup, which is kind of a sister program that is an enforcement program for those that don't voluntarily want to apply to the VRP program and get this higher level of closure. They can get what's called a no further action letter from the state for state cleanup. This is our ironclad gold standard that we have for this site, okay? Plant 2, we got a couple questions on Plant 2.
Is that Plant 2?
Plant 2?
Yes.
Okay. That one has already been sold off, if I remember correctly. It is my understanding, some of you, how many of you have met, how many of you have met Dwayne, what's Dwayne's? Wanty from Schneider. He's been in the community multiple times talking with different people. He's spoken with council members. I don't know if, has he spoken with you, Mayor?
Yeah.
He's met with you, and he's met with multiple homeowners, especially the ones they wanted to get access for, I know. It is my understanding from them, their goal overall is that, yes, they pay property taxes right now. They still will. But their goal is, they know they left a lot of jobs when they left, okay? They want to bring jobs back to the community. They're looking for people that can utilize these spaces. And they're looking to sell them to companies, and that's why they're doing as much as they can to make them most valuable to any new company wanting to come in and operate here and bring jobs to the community. To that end, they've sold off Plant 2. The other goal is to sell off the northern part of what's remaining. This is what I've been told. It's not in documents because in terms of whether they own a property or not, we don't care. They have to do the job, whether they own it or not. They just have to come into some agreement with the new owner, okay? If the job continues beyond their sale, which frequently happens. As you mentioned, in terms of number of sites, Bill, you've got 300 and what? 360?
No,
No?
I'm in the 290s.
290s. Bill has got 290 sites, active sites within the state. Over time, you've closed another 600-ish. So overall, approximately 900 sites that they've dealt with within the VRP program since 1991. State cleanup currently has active a similar number. They've got about 500 in terms of active sites at present. Number of closed sites I do not have off the top of my head right now, but it's 1,000 to 2,000 over the years, at least. Sorry, I didn't have that number. I was thinking VRP today rather than state cleanup. So, as I was saying, is their goal is to clean up this area, make it valuable enough that somebody wants to come in and do jobs. They might anticipate doing demolition out here and retaining the main building at that point. I don't know the thought behind this, but that's up to them at that point. I just want to make sure they clean up the environment. That's what I care about. So that's what it is with Plant 2. They've done...
For Plant 2, right, we have wells on both sides, and we know from looking at the region that the groundwater flow goes to the south and southeast. So anything that goes from Plant 2 is coming this direction. So we already have a pretty good idea of what's in the groundwater from that, for sure.
Excuse me, sir, Plant 2, when I was a boy, there was a huge pond next to Plant, Laidlaw's Plant 2, and over the years, it was spring-fed.
Really?
And you could fish there. A lot of us boys did. We fished it. The problem of it was, and I wrote it down in my question, in '73, there was a big fire in front of the plant. A lot of it got destroyed. And that's where they used to make all the insulations. And they were all asbestos, all of them. Well, when the fire happened, everything got picked up, all the debris and everything else, and dumped in that pond. Then it got covered over with ground dirt. And eventually, pine trees were planted. Problem of it was, all the pine trees died. And we knew from just doing all that, what we were putting into that at the time was probably just undercover, and nobody was supposed to ever know about what was going to go in there. But it was all fire debris. It was ugly. That's my question. Has anything done about that? The other thing about it is, I did know that Schneider knew about this. And that's the first thing they tried to do is get rid of Plant 2, so the liability was somewhere else. It's not.
So where was that
to
pond?
say that they're
That's that
exonerated.
green area between the buildings.
Yeah. So no, we have done extensive investigation in there. I mean, the good thing about asbestos is that it's not water soluble. So it will, if you put it in the dirt, it will stay in the dirt. They did go out and do test pits. They've done the ground penetrating radar to look for anomalies, to investigate, but also we're going to make them agree that if they ever dig in there for utilities, for building foundation, certainly if they ever try and build a home or something on there, that they're going to have to characterize and properly manage those soils. So that area is going to be like, this is going to be marked on their deed.
Know where it is. I mean, they did everything.
Well, we will know where the pond was, right? And that area will have to be special managed. They acknowledge that things went in there in the past, and unfortunately in the 70s things weren't very regulated, right? Our agency is not that old. It doesn't date to the 70s. So there wasn't a lot of regulation. That all fell under the State Board of Health and the county, and people just did things then, and now we're trying to correct it. And we haven't really found much asbestos in the excavation and things they've done, but if we do encounter it, it will have to be properly managed, right? You have to double bag it, you have to wet it. It can be actually disposed in a solid waste landfill, but it takes special handling.
So you don't think it's suspicious? It's the first thing that Schneider did was to get rid of that property.
Well, I think somebody wanted to buy it, and so that's kind of from the environmental perspective. I care about, what did they leave behind, and is it going to be managed, right? And so it will go with the deed, and also our restrictions for my program get put on the deed, and they will go with the deed. So anybody in the future buying this property will know that pond area is special and has to be treated carefully. So while we agree that there could be something that's been missed so far, if it pops up in the future, they're still liable. It's not going to just go away. This is going to ride with the property potentially forever, unless they can demonstrate that they fixed it all.
I'm going to go ahead to the next questions because otherwise we won't be able to get through them. Like I said, we will be available for individual questions and stuff afterwards. Here's one that says, does documentation include permission slips from homeowners signed from Schneider? That is an agreement for Schneider to enter the property and collect samples. From my perspective, I don't need to see the copy of the permission slips. I just know they collected samples from that property and the results from that property. How they deal with that property and that homeowner, that's between them and the homeowner. My goal is I need the information from the data. The next one is, who is the contracted lab for IDEM? Right now we have a lab contract with two entities. One is PACE Laboratories. We utilize PACE actually across the nation, depending on what the sample is to be analyzed for. We use both the Indianapolis lab. There are some samples that go up to Minneapolis, and some would go to other labs. Part of that's based upon capacity, and some of that's based upon expertise. So PACE lab is our primary one, and PACE was the one we sent our samples to for this last round, for the split sampling we conducted. Has Schneider property or the adjoining properties been tested for dioxins? If not, why? Right now, dioxins are not listed as a contaminant concern for this property. Dioxins are produced through flame. One thing that there's some misconceptions out there about dioxins. Yes, they're produced primarily through the burning of chlorinated compounds. That's what produces it. That's why it's a big discussion for what's going on in the country right now. But what people don't realize is dioxins can also be produced from the burning of wood, straight up regular wood. You have to determine what's there from that forest fires or other things, compared to man-made created dioxins. Burning of plastics is usually a big source of dioxins, flat out. My grandma had a burn barrel back in Iowa, and she'd burn everything under the sun. I realized later what was going on with it, and I'm glad that you're not supposed to burn in city limits and barrels and trash and burning trash, and there's reasons for it. But most people don't know that it can also be from just burning of wood, forests. The key is determining what came from where and how to figure that out. How many split tests have you done, and how many more will you perform, and are they random? Right now, we've done one split sampling event. It was a groundwater sampling event. We had, were there 6 samples collected or 5?
It was 5 and a dupe.
5 and a dupe, so we had 6. All right, my memory's not failed me completely. We will do them as we feel are necessary to make sure everything is accurate.
They are random.
They are random. We don't announce them.
They're supposed to be telling us when they're going up there, and then we can bring our jars.
Yes, and then we can bring our samples and collect them at that point. I'll let you do a follow-up, but not a long one.
Because you pointed out in your speech earlier that you did this, so you knew that Schneider's company is pretty much really relatively close to your results. But you're telling this with only one sampling?
For right now, I can say, based upon our split sampling we conducted, yes, they matched up extremely well. In fact,
That's
better
only
than
one.
That is only one. What we do, oftentimes, because this, let's just say the soil issue we've got going on is related to the plant. Okay, those results. Schneider's not collecting these samples. Schneider is not having them sent to them and then Schneider sent it forward. It goes from the environmental consultant to the laboratory. There's chain of custodies involved with this. So when you take them out, you put on the chain of custody, it says, this sample, we want to analyze for these things. It's a soil, groundwater, or vapor sample. Here's the time it was collected, and here's the sample location. Okay. Once those are collected for the day, those are then sent off to the lab. Chelsea has been up here 6-ish times, minimum 6 times, to provide oversight to make sure their sampling is being done correctly. That is our other way to verify. So if they're sampling correctly and our split sample matches up with it, we know it's being done correctly. So it's just not physically sending our samples to lab to confirm, it's also visual confirmation, and then those samples are sent off. If the COC, and that's something you'll see in the documentation that we have online, if it doesn't match up, we make comments on it. Our chemists will say, wait a minute, this is outside the parameters, the samples were either too hot, didn't arrive in sufficient time. So those are red flags to us that something's off. And so that spurs us to say, oh, maybe we need to do another split sampling event, or maybe we need to be up there even more than we have been to watch them do their samplings. Let's see. What have boring tests inside the building shown? Contamination under the building. That's what it's shown. Volatile organic contamination under the building. That moves.
For years.
Yes, yes. With this stuff, you have to look at the breakdown products to get an estimate of when the contamination was released. It could still be, I know it's empty now, but because there are the original main products that haven't broken down into daughter products, you can't definitively say it didn't happen up until today. Except, oh, the plant's empty. Well, it can't happen up until today. But based upon the ratios of contaminants they're seen, a little of this, a little more of that, a lot of this, We can say that it's most likely a pretty old plume, and their estimate, and it's contained in the document online, somewhere around the 1950s and 60s, up to the 1970s, primarily, okay? Would the test results have shown, higher levels in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s? Yes, it would, up until the plant closure. Like I said, you have the main product that's released, and then you have what's called daughter products. Those are the breakdown products. And so you go by those ratios. There can be other things involved. For example, they may have used TCE during this 30 years, and then they switched to PCE for a few years over here, or they switched to TCA to do their stripping before they paint. That's factored in on this. And so it's not definitive, but that's the overall, based upon the ratios we're seeing, is the 50s through like the 70s.
Is that with no one in there?
Those are the ratios we're seeing today.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now, the use of these chemicals is regulated. You know, they're cradle to grave. So when you buy it, it gets reported to IDEM that they bought it. Where they dispose it gets reported to IDEM. So they haven't used any of these hazardous waste things in since the 80s, actually. And then we track that, and that's actually partly why they got into that enforcement action, is because when they closed the plant, they produced more, and then that didn't match up with
When they started doing their drillings.
generator, and then it was caught through paperwork with IDEM, because when that truck takes it away, just what's going on with that landfill thing, everything is tracked. It all gets reported back to IDEM. So IDEM has independent confirmation, the trucking company delivering it, and the trucking company hauling off the waste. And so anymore now, it's fairly easy to track because the use is highly regulated. Now back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, it wasn't.
There were no environmental regulations.
And really, these didn't come into use till kind of after World War II. So really, wide use, so they didn't really start before.
Next set of questions right here. Do you have any idea how long Schneider has been aware of the contamination? Schneider originally came, I had a meeting with them, okay? They inquired about applying to the VRP program shortly before they applied to the VRP program. I had a meeting with them, and I'm like, okay, here's what this program is, or you can do the state cleanup program. Those are your two options, okay? At that point, you got to report the release and then go from there. They'd heard the stories from former workers that there was contamination and issues there. Obviously, the stories were correct, okay? So I had a meeting with them. I explained the differences between the two programs, and they decided to go ahead and enter the VRP program. VRP program actually costs a little more. We do cost recovery in both programs, but VRP, you got to submit an application fee at the head of it, but then we subtract out of that fee for the work we do in reviewing that application. They entered the VRP program at that point. Were they aware of it a year, 10 years, 20 years? I don't know. We didn't have a reported release for the facility. It is the owner's responsibility to report those releases. That's what the state law is. The consultant can't report those releases. Other individuals can't report the releases. Individuals such as workers that were there can call us and issue a complaint, and then we do our investigation, which drives some of the work we do. But if we don't have a reported release, there's no starting point for us at that point. Next question, retired employee. What does the information for those who are inside the facility? I can't speculate. I can only tell you what we have now. Okay, I can't go back in time. I can't go back and say, oh, they use this here, so this level must have been inside the plant itself. I can't do that. What you do when you're using it, there are multiple ways to use TCE, for example. It can be in a big vat. You can have blowers that pull out from it. It could be in a large area where there's sufficient volume. The OSHA, which is the Occupational Safety Hazard Health, they're the ones who regulate worker safety and indoor air levels, okay? Once there's a release and it's back in there, that's mine. I use my numbers, and we go from there. But I don't have a time capsule. I can't go back in time and say, oh, there was a lot of exposure here or there was not. All I know is I've got this in the environment now. I've got to take care of it, and I'm going to make sure they take care of it. Will soil be removed? If so, where does it go? Any soil removals, as Bill said, RCRA came into big time in the 1970s, early 70s, a lot with the Clean Water Act. A lot of environmental laws were passed then. It, as Bill mentioned, it's cradle to grave. If it's produced and it needs to be taken care of, it'll go to a landfill after it's characterized. There are two types of landfill. Well, actually, there's multiple ways to address things. Depending on what the contaminant is in there and its levels that are in there, you'll determine whether it's characteristically hazardous or characteristically not hazardous. For example, let's use the example of lead. I can't send lead to an incinerator. It doesn't do anything for it, okay? Volatile organic compounds can be incinerated. They can also be put in a landfill. We now have subtitle D landfills for general waste and subtitle C landfills for hazardous waste. Those are lined landfills that have puncture mechanisms as well as leachate collection systems. So the design as well as cover and caps, so the design is to keep them, the waste contained in perpetuity until either it breaks down or it's just there, it's entombed, and that is the goal. For example, you guys have heard of some of the waste that's going to different locations. That's all based upon where it can go. There are federal regulations to where things can go. If it's characteristically hazardous, it can only go to a certain number of places. If it's characteristically not hazardous, it can go to a lot more places. If it's construction debris, there's a third option out there in terms of landfill. So it all depends on if soils are excavated and what's decided at that point. What is their characteristic? Because they don't pre-do it. It's determined at the time you got to take your samples, send them to a landfill. And the landfill is the one that makes the waste determination upon those levels. And then we inspect the landfills. We also regulate the landfills and make sure that they're taking the right waste where it goes.
There will be a soil management plan as part of the
Yes.
closure process. So going forward, it will tell you when you dig up these soils, exactly how to characterize it, exactly what tests you have to run, depending what the results are, where it can go. So all that will be spelled out. I mean, we already have a process for doing it while it's in the program, but there will also be a document that will memorialize that will go on with the site, that will stay with the site.
But why wouldn't they be required to do that now? Why wait until somebody wants to build? If they did it and it's a contaminant, why not make them do that now?
Remove the soil, you mean?
Right.
All the soil. The statute allows you to leave contamination on your site as long as it's properly managed. So if you have a thick concrete floor and that is under it, and you can demonstrate that it's you've done sufficient remedy underneath the floor so that it's not going anywhere, and as part of your closure, it will be. We recognize there's still some contamination left under the floor, and if the floor is ever cut, or they got to do a sewer or whatever, that it will fall under this plan and it will have to be properly managed. Now, you don't automatically have to cut the floor now and remove that. If you can mitigated enough that it won't continue to go off-site, right? So you do have some responsibility, and you also have a responsibility to protect the workers and occupants of the property as well. So you have to show that, like, if there's an office right above that those people are breathing safe air too, or whatever.
If the floor is removed, there are contingencies associated with that. Because oftentimes the floor or a building is used as a cap to eliminate exposure to any contamination that would remain. You had a quick one. It's okay. Oh, it jumped out of your head. Okay. I thought your follow-up just jumped out of your head and you wanted me to cover it. The second one on here, it says, will Schneider monitor health issues of families in effect?
He came back in his head.
I'm sorry.
Oh.
As a follow-up to that, let's say someone is putting, say, Peru utilities, infrastructure in the ground.
Mhm.
Whose responsibility is it to dig that soil and expose that waste
So there
so that we don't endanger the employees?
So depending on where it is and what we know is there, so right, we're having to characterize it first. But if it exceeds like construction worker levels, where we would, it's based on a fairly short duration, 250 days, like, that we recognize the person isn't going to be in the sewer trench for, years, then an OSHA certified hazardous waste person would have to be on site to be visually inspecting, maybe sampling with a photoionization detector to kind of check for volatile levels. So that's what this plan, so Schneider or that burden, whatever, could be passed to the future property owners, right? This will all go down with the deed and our closure.
But
and
it
if you
won't fall to the municipality.
No, it should not fall to the municipality.
Just making sure.
All right.
All right. Any other, what do we got over here question-wise? Still have? Is this the last filled out sheet? Okay. Doing very good. Excellent. Actually, are you guys getting the information you're looking for? Just a quick overall? All right.
Yeah, there was a question too there that you.
I stated it and then I gotcha. Okay. Thank you. Will Schneider monitor health issues of families in affected homes? In terms of health issues, we are not doctors. We are not health professionals. We look at contamination. We have levels that we go by and levels to get those exposures taken care of. The problem with this is that it also goes back to that time machine. I don't know in the past what happened. I don't know if these workers were also in that facility that may have been exposed at higher levels. I don't know if they worked elsewhere and had exposures. I can't speak to that. I always encourage anybody that has concerns with their health to talk to their doctor. We aren't qualified to be a health professional and make those calls. We have this Department of Health where they have people that are qualified as well as physicians. I know physicians tend to get a little uncomfortable, and I've heard from other sites where they can't, and that's the difficulty of the work we do. You can't say because of this you've got that. People are variable. People have different exposures. People have different lifestyles.
There were too many of them in there that had the symptoms for everything.
And that's legitimate. I don't dismiss that at all.
My husband passed away because of that plan. And I know.
Yeah, and that's possible.
I'm sorry,
I don't want to dismiss that at all. But I am not qualified really to do anything that, and Schneider has not spoken to us about anything about that.
There are several others also that have passed. There are several others that are ill because of that place. And I'm not yelling at you.
Oh,
It's just
I get it. It's personal. It really is.
personal.
They
were a family in there.
It's like me wanting to clean this up for my kids.
I know it.
This is it. This
It
is
should have not
this
been
is
allowed to go on.
And we don't regulate those exposures. Now, I don't want to get into and tell you the how we deal and how we derive our numbers. You know, like indoor air, it's over 26 years of exposure, breathing that level or higher. You then have 1 in, is it 1 million or 100,000 chances of getting some effect from that. Okay, so 1 in a million. That's what our numbers are. Okay, there may have been higher exposures within plant. I don't know. Okay, I can't say that. Back to the.
I asked a question on Facebook the other day on the Square post. I'm sorry, and I just found this out not too long ago. It was a simple question. My husband would double up in bed with cramps, leg cramps. He would come home because he had spots in his eyes from migraines. He had to get home in the dark in bed. I asked that question. I said, how many of you experience headaches or migraines or leg cramps? It is unbelievable. And since they've left there were a couple, 3 that since they've left there, they have subsided. So you can't tell me that place did not know what was going on.
And I won't.
I
Well,
am, sir.
in terms of what's going on, I don't know, but
No, and
but
I know it's not your fault,
in
but
terms,
it's
yeah.
just unbelievable.
Sir, all I was saying too is this is a heads up for you also. And you should have it like that. Just, this is a company that they like to make money. And they're not going to be making any bones about it. I was running the best or the top stores in both plants when I retired 10 years ago, right? 10 years ago. They had a big thing coming along with clients all over the country that now, instead of standard gray, they wanted colored cabinets to show for this, show that. We had clients from all across the board, from everything that you could possibly imagine. Home Depot, Walmart, McDonald's. I mean, it just went on and on how many clients we had. We did the World Trade Center twice, and then not to mention most of the skyscrapers in New York, they have Square E stuff going on. I managed to take a vacation with my girls when they were younger. We went to St. Louis, to the Arch. I love the Arch.
I've been there.
I've been there?
Yeah.
In a little,
My wife hated getting in the little barrel.
yeah, my wife wouldn't, she got up to the top, she was like, ah,
Yeah.
ah. Well, the kids were all over the place.
And it would sway.
But the thing about it is, you go up in the little gondolas, 2 people up at that, all the way up, you see these little glass things to see the workings of the inside. Do that again, you can see how many Square D boxes there were going up there to do this.
Every place you go, you look for Square E boxes.
And I know they're in the business to make money and as much money as they can. But in our world, that translates to, are they doing what needs to be done? And are they doing the things we request them to do? And
What years were you at IU?
IU, 1979 to 1986.
Well, you're no.
A 7-year program. I work full-time during some of that too. Sorry, I'm not that.
I was there for all the way up till 74. And I also was at Purdue. I was the only guy in the plant that ever went to both universities and still decided I was going to stay on the floor because it was too volatile in the office. You got that?
Yeah.
I wanted to tell you about when I left with this colored cabinetry. The problem of it was that they had to implement this, had to paint everything first, which is hazard enough with a big paint line. But then everything had to be moved to the spray booth and color painted.
Yeah.
Right? All under basically a certain amount of hush-hush, well, this is going to make us a lot of money thing, right? I was in maintenance, too. And I got to wondering what's going on because I had to help put this stuff together. You had nozzles, you had electrical, the cabinetry had to be set up so that it was at least safe to have breathing apparatuses you had to deal with. That was a big hazard just to get it to where it was.
And in the old days, they didn't have those protective measures in place.
And it was a lot of fighting for all of us to try to get to the point in which things were safe. Now, here's the big problem. I'm looking at this stuff. I have to also run the storeroom. Who's ordering the paint? Who is getting the paint in here? I had to order everything. Copper from Chile, aluminum, bringing all this stuff together. We had over, probably over 800 vendors that I had to order stuff to. You
That's
see,
typical.
big time,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Where's the paint coming from? Where is this paint coming from? So I'm looking at the paint in the spray booth, because people were getting sick around there, believe it or not. These canisters were coming in with no labels on them, no identification, nothing. It bothered me. I mean, it wouldn't bother anybody, because you're supposed to be ordering stuff, and this stuff is showing up. They're stockpiling it.
It sounded like a repacker.
What
They
the
took it
hell
in
is
bulk
going
and
on?
then
So I did some
dropped it
research
down.
and
They
found
didn't
out
have it.
It was benzene laden. Benzene was banned in the United States in 1975, no more. It's got the simplest hydrocarbon. It does the same thing to our bodies that WD-40 does to metal. It goes right through all of us, right? And that's
Yes.
the only thing that medical institutions ever found that causes leukemia, right?
Benzene
Let me finish.
is found to cause leukemia, as well as it's also found to cause brain tumors.
They use it for nozzles to keep them
Yes.
clean,
Yes,
for the painting operations.
yes.
Pittsburgh Paint and Glass was shut down, almost went bankrupt because they had to get rid of benzene, which is really going to upset them. They were not going to make any money on that one. So what they did is they moved to Canada, where there were no regulations, and they could do this. Square D was buying all this unmarked benzene from Canada and bringing it in without even me having any idea or any say-so to it. And I had a friend named Kenny Chester who got very sick, and he got leukemia. And the only way he was alive today is because he had bone marrow transplants from his brother. That's the only reason why he was alive. Several other people almost died. It was awful. I wasn't, and I wasn't mad about it all. All I did is I researched everything I could find on the situation. I went to the front office, I handed them the folders. I went to the union, I handed them the folders. I said, you guys are going to have to shut this down. More people are going to get sick. I'm upset. I've had it, I'm retired. I'm out of here. That was 10 years ago. Did they do anything with all that? Where is all the benzene they stockpiled? Where? Gone.
I do not know.
I
do not
just
know.
picked up on that to tell you.
And
They're like that, this company.
the other records we have are not only the VRP records, we have disposal records at IDEM, where some of this stuff can be investigated.
And I wouldn't have even said anything about it if it hadn't have been for the fact that we just had the big train wreck in Ohio.
Mhm.
And I'm looking at that thing and I'm looking at the what? These tankers had benzene derivatives on them. Benzene. And I'm thinking, what happened there? That same train went through Peru. Go right through.
Let's make sure we can get all the
Yeah.
questions answered that
Yeah.
people have submitted.
Yeah, well, you shut me down. Good job.
That was early on. We said what we'd go ahead and how we would discuss things. I don't want anybody leaving this room not getting their questions answered. And if this continues on for another 10, 15, 20 minutes, there will people who will be leaving that will be angry that they did not get asked their question. They'll be angry with me. They'll be angry with others.
Is anybody angry with me?
And
Well, we do look for, in the homes and in the groundwater, we do look for benzene. So
Just heads up.
yes,
we're not
it
detecting.
is one of our compounds that we look for. We look for volatile organic compounds. That includes chlorinateds, it includes petroleum compounds. I'm going to finish up with these, and then we'll catch those because I almost missed your second half of the question because we got sidelined here. Now, it says, what about the caverns under the site, football field, and residential? Do you mean VUGs, which is a geological term where it's a limestone that has been eroded through solution features over time? Or what do you mean in terms of caverns under the facility?
Air pockets,
Air pockets.
and like you were talking about, the
Mhm.
erosion.
Yes, and yeah, Schneider is intending to install bedrock wells, and they're also looking at the vapor where, if there are any vapor pockets or areas outside of the plant or that would not be covered within the plant. One of the reasons they're doing SVE, and if you look at this one right here, sorry, you'll notice a lot of yellow on here. Essentially, the yellow is sand. And sand is a lot more permeable to vapors in groundwater. That's where things move the quickest, okay? And when you're dealing with this, this is where you're pulling your vapors from, okay? And this is where the concern is. When groundwater drops, okay, chlorinated compounds are heavier than water. That means they have a higher mass than one, which is water, which means it drops through the water column. So as we're seeing things enter the water column, it's also dropping from the water column. And so as you go, you're getting cleaner water above it as you go farther out, okay? And so you don't have the opportunity for volatilization up, okay, that you did closest to the homes, where it's closest to the source of the contamination that are at the top of the water column, okay? And so if you're talking things within the limestone, based upon what we've got here in the geology, okay, here's the limestone with sand and gravel above it. The sand and gravel is where you're going to pull your vapors from and do your air sparging from. You can't really do sparging and venting from limestone rock. So that's what's going on there. Have you tested the mobile home park?
I will say I'm certainly interested in the dissolution if you know of any local knowledge. Certainly it's a big issue in southern Indiana where you have, more karstified limestone, and it can be a conduit for contamination. So I haven't seen any information about it currently, and if we have information, I would be interested in looking at it and seeing if we could, do some future sampling.
And
I
Bill's
know
got
the
a
football field is the other way.
And you've got a VRP site down in Bloomington where that's an issue.
We have a number of
and
them.
we've got other sites where you're dealing with solution features, and also where there's caverns. Bedford's a big one, Bloomington's a big one. The dissolution features through that whole area are huge. I used to spelunk when I was at IU. Actually, excuse me, I grew up in Bloomington. Tested the mobile home park, which is to the Are you talking up in here?
No, on the left.
On your other map.
It's on that map. It's by plant 2, directly to the left of it.
Oh, I see it. Thank you. This area, no, because all the stuff we had, we don't have any pathways for anything headed that way. The groundwater is all going this way and pulling anything that has been released within the plant to this direction. So all the data that we've got here, and you can see the different types of points where different data has been collected. Soil vapor extraction, subslab, passive soil gas, air sparge well, groundwater pump test well, monitoring wells, temporary wells, soil borings, test pits, subslab depressurization, and sewer manholes. All the data that's been collected so far has shown there's no areas of concern over in that area.
Plus mobile homes, because they don't have direct contact with the ground, the contaminants, once they got to the surface, would
If they were
blow
there.
away. They wouldn't go up into the home.
There are sick people that live there.
Where do you test in homes? One area or multiple? Actually, indoor air testing is done in multiple areas. It all depends on the type of house. We as an agency, we want to see something sub-slab, if you're on a slab, because we want to see what would be coming into the home, and then we want to test areas within the home. So let's say you have a basement and a first level. We want something from the basement, we want something from the first level, and we want something from the sub-slab. And those are collected in canisters. They're shaped like, they're little stainless steel balls about this big. You can have different types. They're vacuum canisters, and they're sent in by the laboratories, certified clean, either in batches or individually. And then those are received, and what you do is through a specialized mechanism, you open them up slightly, and it will draw air into them for typically a 24-hour period. The goal is then to get out there and close that valve before that time period is up, and then that entire unit is sent to a laboratory. Those are left in people's homes. We don't have, the consultant doesn't stay overnight. IDEM, when we do it, we don't stay overnight. You know, it is in your home collecting that information. For the sub-slab, we'll drill a little hole in the basement floor. The consultant will drill a little hole in the basement floor, and a little tube, collection tube will go in there, and then that will go to the silver stainless steel canister that pulls those vapors out, and then those go to an air. Those are then analyzed, and then we then compare those levels to our residential indoor air levels that we've got listed in our RCG manual. So yes, it's multiple locations. The goal overall is to take living spaces. You have to be careful when you do sampling indoors. There are interferences with products within a home every day. I had a site where we were collecting samples, and we realized through our survey of the house prior to that they did a lot of craft work within the home. She was a crafty person. She made craft books. She did all these things. She kind of semi-professional at it. She ended up getting sampled twice because the consultant the first time did not tell her to remove those things from the house, and they showed up in our scans. Once we had them removed from the house and the garage, the levels went down, okay? And the reason we were able to figure this out is, one, we want them to take surveys to go through people's kitchen cabinets and the garages to say, ooh, this one might interfere, or we might pick this up. New houses have a lot of, due to new construction, your laminates are basically glued sawdust, okay? And all those glues will show up in a scan. They're volatile organic compounds. Everybody loves that new house smell? Everybody loves that new car smell? Guess what? Those are all chemicals. And those will show up in our scans because we are looking at the parts per billion. All right? So you have to be careful. But yes, our goal is that living areas where people are living are analyzed. What about other toxic chemicals that aren't being tested? When you do an investigation, you figure out what the possible chemicals are. Chemicals of concern is what we call them, on the facility itself. If we're not finding it in the groundwater, would we expect it off-site? Okay? It all depends on the rate or how the exposure could occur. So let's say here we've got soil contamination on site, and we've got groundwater contamination that has gone under the plant into the neighborhood here. We know what the chemicals we're finding on site. It's known. It shows up in the analysis. Those are the ones you're going to expect off-site. You're not all of a sudden going to get that. You'll get daughter products, and that's what we look for, because we don't only want the main chemical, we want the daughter products. But, for example, if I'm not finding, let's say, blue stuff on site, they hadn't used blue stuff, or even if I don't know what they used and I'm not finding it, and it can't travel via the groundwater to get outside of there and turn into vapor or something at that point, I'm typically not going to test for blue stuff.
So
We do, in the beginning, we do make them do more broad categories and then kind of screen out with the things we actually find. And one of the unique features of the voluntary mediation program is they actually get coverage for particular compounds. So for some reason it was missed, they wouldn't get any closure coverage for it. They're not getting a covenant not to sue for it, because if it's not listed on their what we investigated, then they didn't get any closure coverage for it.
Yes. And it's still considered as an open release. And should they not follow through with dealing with that compound, because they don't want to stay in the program or they're already closed out from the program, they can either re-enter the program or they can go to state cleanup, where they're going to be forced to go ahead and do that. Why wasn't a remedy used when chemicals were first dumped? Back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, whenever, early 70s, it wasn't until 70s, and then modifications, if I remember, for RCRA in early 2000 or 1980s. Yeah, the 70s and then the 80s when RCRA was modified. There weren't a lot of regulations in place. In fact, early on, you had these little county dumps. People would throw stuff out back, and they were just dump sites. They weren't even landfills. They were dump sites. People could dispose of anything anywhere at any time. We now have the regulations in place, and RCRA through cradle to grave, on if you've generated something, you need to dispose of it appropriately. There weren't in the 50s and 60s and when a lot of these things were released. And people weren't necessarily cognizant that this is bad stuff. Okay, these toxicity tests that were done to determine whether a chemical is hazardous or non-hazardous wasn't it. They didn't have these things unless it was extremely bad, that somebody was injured while they were working on it, okay? And then tests were done at that point from the chemical manufacturers as well as through OSHA. So why weren't these things done then? IDEM wasn't even an agency back then. It was State Board of Health prior to that. And prior to that, they didn't have any regulations associated with it. Landfill regulations are post-RCRA, and we've got dump sites clear back into the 1800s that we're dealing with. So that's why a remedy wasn't used, because no remedy was needed. It was allowed. It wasn't thought to be a problem. It wasn't thought to be hazardous. We've learned since then. You guys are learning some things here tonight that you've probably not known prior. We all learn. Fortunately, we deal in the business and have for many, many years. We've learned a lot of things. We've seen a lot of scenarios. We have the regulations in place to make sure that's addressed. So we're living in better times. Remedy the situation, but how do you remedy the people getting sick? Once again, I can only speak to the environmental contamination. Okay, I can't for health issues. I'm sorry. I feel you're all correct in the way you either have or someone near you has something, but I encourage you to talk to your physician, okay, and work through there. There are other health professionals out there that can help you with that. The state has health professionals. Please do so. But I can talk to you about contamination, how to investigate, and how to clean it up. Why put a restriction on the property if there is nothing there? If there is nothing there, the property will have no restriction to it. None. Okay? Those restrictions are in place. For example, the old pond area. Okay? Let's say they threw nothing but dirt and rocks in there, and trees. Anybody can dig it up. Anybody can take that stuff and move it someplace else because it's not going to cause a problem. Okay, so it will have, if that's what is here, it will have no restrictions on it. There will be no digging restriction, no building restriction, no anything on it. We only restrict stuff where there's residual compounds left that need to stay where they're at and protected to eliminate the exposures that are there. It's quite possible that the next purchaser, whoever they are, may want to build something there. So they'll be adding an extra level beyond what we have certified as protective on top of that. We don't know, but we don't want them to remove our protective level that we've looked at and certified as being protective. Is there a potential risk to human health from the air sparge? Air sparge, no. What it does is, yes, it causes more volatilization of the chemicals up, but air sparge do not do alone. Air sparge gives you three things. One, it pulls the contaminants out of the groundwater. Two, it adds oxygen, and chlorinated compounds need oxidizing and anoxidizing conditions to break down, okay? Each one needs a different type of step to help break it down. So this adds the oxygen, because down underneath in groundwater, you don't find a lot of oxygenation going on down there, okay? You do at surface within the first foot of groundwater or whatever, but usually not a lot of oxygenation with it. So what it does is it pulls the stuff out, because the stuff loves air more than it does water. It pulls it out, and then it's within the vapor zone. And if there was no vapor extraction going on, yes, it can cause a bigger problem. But what you have to do is not only your radius of influence for your air sparge to pull it out, you got to have your radius of influence to capture all that stuff that is being pulled out. So typically, almost never do you have air sparge without SVE going on, unless it's in a large depopulated area near like a farm field or something like that, where it would be okay for it to get volatilized. A lot of the bacteria that eat this stuff are in the upper levels of the groundwater, as well as the moist areas of soil. There are bacteria that across Indiana and across the world that do eat chlorinated compounds. It's a very slow process. And oftentimes what they'll do is they won't do just air sparge and SVE. They will do biological enhancements, which means they will inject food into the subsurface to help those bacteria thrive. Because oftentimes they're missing something like phosphorus, or molasses is sometimes one of the carriers to help them eat chlorinated contamination. If you have an underground storage tank with petroleum in it and it releases over or within a chlorinated plume, you end up with a cleaner spot from the chlorinateds than you do outside of that area where the petroleum has been, because the petroleum acts as the carbon in it acts as a food source to help out those bacteria, and so you end up with a cleaner spot. It's awesome. Employees have stated contamination was illegally dumped in a pond. Who had oversight of that area and cleanup? We do. And that's what this investigation was about here. And we've got that data online, and you can see exactly what was found. This one has a statement here. Is that the single page? The yellow sheet? Is that what this is? Carter?
No, I was just going to speak of my husband.
Okay. Could you please explain Table 1 on page 3 of the April 15, 2022 report? You have a copy of it? It says?
I want right here.
Sweet. I'll give it to these guys and have them look at it while I go through the rest of the questions. Oh, yeah, these are pulled from IDEM's remediation closure guide, a risk-based closure guide. We call it R2. What they've done is they've taken values in our table. I'd have to compare the numbers to be, see, they haven't used the numbers there, they've just used X's. All right, take a look at that. and included that in a table as apparently, is that based upon the exposure routes they're anticipating?
It says where there were exceedances of those levels.
Right now, off my top of my head, because it's first I've seen that, what that typically means is what they found was in higher concentration than what our table numbers have. So if our table number says 1 for either a vapor and 2 for a soil and 3 for a water, they're above that 1 or 2 or 3, and they've marked it off depending on what media was affected and above our number. But I have to look at that more in depth to be absolutely positive, but that's what it sounds like just by quick looking at that.
So part of that question is, we've had this discussion on Facebook, whatever, and if Dwayne's email alluded to this last week about tap water, drinking water, and that's what, and then I talked with, excuse me, Josh Chance, and they've tested, and there's no, I mean, our drinking water.
Are those your utilities people?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I can speak to that. The City of Peru Utilities, Wellfield is far remote from this site. There's actually a state law that says we can't depict where that wellfield is, if it's a 9/11 thing. But it is nowhere near this area here. It draws from its own water source. This area, they've done well surveys. This area is on municipal water supply. So your water is coming from that well field, treated, and then piped to your house. What happens is those utilities are required annually to sample that water and send those results into IDEM's Office of Water. There are different schedules depending on what they think could or should or are supposed to sample for. So, for example, you're always sampling for lead and copper every year. You're sampling for THM, which are breakdowns and side products associated with chlorination, because they're chlorinating the water so you don't get bacteria on it and you don't want to get sick from it. So those are sampled every single year, and those go in. There are other schedules, typically a 3-year, and some are 5. And some are single times they sample for other compounds. For example, the city is on the utilities is on a 3-year schedule for sampling volatile organic compounds. And there's a list. In fact, I brought it with me because that question came up. What about our drinking water? On that list, it shows you exactly the compounds they test for. And I know when I looked, you can go online. We've got a website we can point you to. You can see it for yourself, exactly what was found. On those, the ones I looked at, I only went back to 2002. I know there was stuff back to the early 90s when I was kind of glancing through. But I looked through the 2000s. I didn't see any exceedances for volatile organic compounds, which are the compounds of concern, clear back into the 2000s. There are questions about, well, what about things they aren't sampling for? First, it's like I had mentioned up there, we find out what we've got and then sample at that point. Well, right now, we don't have any reason, any plausible reason that the well field will be impacted from this site. And so we don't ask IDEM Office of Water, ask them to sample for those things. They're just required to as part of their federal permit and IDEM's permit. PFAS came up. PFAS. Perfluorinated and polyfluorinated compounds. Those are the true forever chemicals. And I know it had been reported that some other chemicals have been listed, like acetone and some of these others as forever chemicals. Those are not forever chemicals. The ones are actually poly and perfluorinated compounds. And what those are is they've taken fluorine and attached it to something to make something useful for modern day. Any of you wore suede shoes and put the spray on them so they'd be waterproof? PFAS. Fast food containers, some of the bags. You know how they leak grease, water? PFAS, they're coated. It used to be wax, but it turned out PFAS was better. You don't want to have your fast food sitting on your lap while you're driving and then it leak into your pants. PFAS are used in a huge number of products. There are over, last I heard, there were over 6,000 PFAS compounds. Right now, EPA is looking at two, PFOA and PFOS. For an MCL. I can elaborate further, but
Yeah, those things aren't officially regulated yet.
Yes.
It's my sense that at least the only, if you look, when I pull up a map of where is PFAS in Indiana, it's only appearing, and that's not to say it's not in other areas, but it's appearing on military bases.
yes.
Because it's used heavily there as flame retardants and trainings and all kinds of
Firefighter
things.
training,
That's right.
which is why the legislature passed a law a couple of years back requiring any training that uses AFFF, it's called AFFF, foam, firefighting foam, to be contained if they use it for training, or not to use that foam for training. They're currently, if I remember correctly, looking at potentially doing a legislation associated with firefighter monitoring, health blood monitoring for PFAS, because they are the most exposed population when it comes to that. For this site, okay, yes, they have reportedly found, and I've not found it yet. I've been told it's there, but I've not found it in the documentation yet. Reportedly, there were PFAS in the groundwater at this site. In terms of your drinking water, this site can't affect that. So,
Chelsea, what does that graph mean? Because it says tap water.
So when it says tap water, that's the name for the IDEM screening level. So like for TCE, it's 5 parts per billion. So that just means that the contaminated water exceeds what we think is safe to drink. It does not mean that you are drinking it, right? There are no wells in this plume, but those levels exceed. And I will say right now with PFAS, because we don't have an official number, the VRP would not give closure coverage for PFAS until or unless there is an EPA number that is agreed upon and that is basically nationwide. So right now, while we are concerned about it and we have numbers we sort of use to screen, they would not officially get coverage because there's not a totally established number.
So is this
currently
mostly relate to if they have wells?
if they had drinking water wells, because that's your exposure route.
If people were drinking this water, then it would exceed it, and we would immediately need to do something.
That makes sense. Thank you very much.
And typically that's filters or an alternate water supply. Let
Are
me
you
make
still going through questions?
Can I go through a couple more, because we got 10 minutes?
I have a specific follow-up health question. I just want to get to for everybody.
All right. How long did IDEM know about the contamination at that site when they applied to the program? I kind of discussed earlier that until a release is reported or there is an investigation that we've done through a complaint, we don't. People kind of have the impression that government is either all-knowing and can force people to do. Well, this country has property rights, owner rights. We cannot go stomping onto some properties, personal, commercial, or otherwise, to say, you've got to start sampling for contamination right now because I want you to. Okay? So it's only when we have an indication that there's been a release, either through a report or we've determined it through an inspection, a normal inspection that we do, that starts the process of IDEM working on sites.
And our process is long and involved, and nobody comes in without having good evidence that they have a release, right? So if you've heard of like phase ones and phase twos, when you buy property and you kind of, first you look like, what did you do on the property and what did you do around it? And then maybe you put a couple holes in. We're well beyond that before anybody comes into my program. They've already done fairly extensive sampling to know that they have a release that needs to be managed. So everybody that comes in knows before they do that they have a problem. That's why they come in.
The next one on here, what are possible effects to people exposed to the contamination? There are health-related documents available at the CDC, the federal website. It will tell you a compound, a chemical compound, and what its effects might be. Those are done through what originally was called a material data sheet, a safety data sheet. They're now called SDSs, safety data sheets. For example, and like I said, I'm not a health professional, but I've been doing this for a few years. I'm aware of some of the effects because I've read some of that stuff with the CDC and NIH. I see some heads nodding, so they've read them too. TCE, you're looking primarily at kidney and bladder cancer. For benzene, as discussed, leukemia and brain glioblastomas, and other compounds have different effects. What people don't know is that before there was an awareness of these chemicals, did anybody here know that TCE used to be used as an anesthetic? Straight up, TCE was an anesthetic. For many years, clear up into the 60s, I've seen photos of cans. Just look it up on the web. Yeah. So it's been used for many, many years. Cocaine used to be in Coca-Cola and all sorts of other stuff. Before the FDA started regulating some of these things. So like I said, I am not a health professional. I don't pretend to be. I don't claim to be. It's not me. I'm a rocks and dirt guy. Talk to your health professionals about that, or look on the NIH, National Institutes of Health, and CDC, because I think they're combined now, website, and it will tell you these things. It will tell you possible outcomes from that, and discuss that with your physician. He can run tests associated with some of those. Oftentimes, people say, well, why don't I just give some blood? Or why can't I just breathe into something? That does not correlate necessarily to an exposure or that compound.
They gave health assessments where my husband, at Squirty, Schneider, they all had to do it.
Good.
You know, that's how my husband found out that he had cancer, stage 4. They sent him to the urologist because his PSAs were like, I guess. Yeah. So that was the beginning. Also, I have just something to say, and I don't know if any of these gentlemen here, when we were at another meeting, they used to pull trains in beside that plant and dump the stuff right out of it.
Yeah, it looks like it was a rail spur.
Well, no, they dumped the chemicals.
They had a rail, yeah, nickel plate railroad, yeah.
To the side, and they would dump stuff out right there at Squirty.
Yard right beside the plant all those years. They took it out about 10 years.
There's also traps in Squirty.
That was one of the things that I know when I had a discussion with Dwayne Wanty. Sorry. One of the areas that popped up was their loading dock area for finding contamination when they were looking out there.
And they all worked everywhere in that place.
And frequently when we're dealing with sites, loading docks are bing,
but I mean the whole,
and back doors.
Yeah, exactly.
Those are two areas we usually clue in on.
I got a quick funny story I need to tell.
Okay, let me finish these last couple. think these are last couple. Yes, last couple. Purdue overlays limestone. How does this affect how chemicals flow and travel? They do affect their if it's a dissolution limestone where you have dissolution features, which are caverns, cracks, that does flow through those. What happens as the stuff drops down, it'll typically, and usually there's a zone, it's either highly permeable or impermeable right along the soil bedrock interface. That determines how much you need to go into it. I do know that Square D plans on drilling wells into the bedrock, and they will end up getting cores to show you and us what this bedrock is doing, how competent it is. Some bedrock, even limestones, can be extremely competent and allow no flow through them. They don't have a lot of cracks. They're solid. That's why even though the limestone in Bedford had been used to build the Empire State Building, a lot of Washington Monument and other places, there are zones that are extremely competent and zones that are just fractured. So it's all part of the science that we're doing, and it's part of the investigation they're conducting. Down the last couple. Is it different than dirt and clay? Yeah. Clay is typically very, depending on the type, it's impermeable to some extent, okay? There is clay with more sand that can be more permeable, but typically in order of permeability, obviously a crack with nothing holding it back, things will go the fastest. Sand can be compacted at different levels naturally. It can be very permeable or it can be very slowly permeable. We're talking, I forget how many feet per year they estimate the groundwater is flowing here. It's not hundreds or thousands of feet per year. It's feet per year. And then you go on up to clay. And in fact, that's why they cap landfills with clay, because they're impermeable. And they look for a specific type of clay. I think it's called fat clay. 10 to the minus 6 is its permeability. Okay, so they look for the most impermeable clay they can use for landfills, as well as liners for modern day landfills. Are you only focusing on the southeast side? Waste was dumped for years in and around the site and other areas. And I think that one's kind of answered by what we've got here and the investigation that was going on. And you can see for yourself in all the documents that we're just not getting anything over there. The flow is not over there. It's all this way, and specifically, and it surprised them. I'll tell you straight up, it surprised them that it appeared to be very channelized right through there. And they thought, okay, they used the University of Waterloo MIPS, which is a high resolution boring where they can tell. There's some really cool squiggle boring logs that shows you what's permeable and what's not in one of the documents. So it's a channel that was probably buried in a natural flow channel over time. And that's why they're getting what they're getting here. And if you look, the clay is all dipping toward it. There's your low point. Just coming right out through there. So that's your flow that you're getting, which is pulling the contaminated, which is causing groundwater to flow out. Now, that was all the questions, because I saw where you had kind of mentioned everything on here. These are all the questions we've got. All right. Now, we can do some individual stuff. We're right at the time. If people want to leave, they can leave. If they want to stay, they want to stay.
All I wanted to say was my wife's a special needs teacher over in Elmwood. And I had a daughter at the time who was going through college, working in the front office, right? I'm in maintenance as a loan-in guy, and I get the call because we had 4.5 inches of rain that day, right? That's 6 acres of roofing.
Mm-hmm.
All that
it's huge.
eavesdropping and everything never was hooked up to anything else except the main sewer system, right? So I had just got our house built out on the river, up on the hill. It's a geodesic dome. People know where it is. The thing about it was, I had bought basically it's a hot tub, but I got Stella Cheese when they went out of business. And guys worked it all in, hard work to get it all done and everything. Just a couple days before that, right? I come home from the plant because that day I got sent up to the front office because they had ankle-deep water everywhere.
Backed up.
We had to take up all the carpeting.
Yep.
Sewage had backed up everywhere. It was about as bad as I've ever been through getting this done.
It typically happens with older sewage systems.
Raining and raining and raining, right? I get home, all I'm thinking about is maybe I'm gonna take a shower, you know, I'm gonna feed the horses, get the barn done, do that. And my daughter comes home, and she's just really mad because she had to wade around in ankle-deep urine and crap up in the front office until they got her out of there. Now, the funny part is, my wife comes home, and she says, "Do not believe the day I had. This is terrible." The same thing happened over at Elmwood.
Oh, I'm sure.
So that's all a floodplain. Anything that you say might be there and might not be you know, we did, and the whole thing supers out. Where those wells are, sorry, I know where they are. They're on the other side of Redmond's out there. That's where they always been. That's where the whole groundwater has gone. So you don't have anything that's separated from it all. It all happens.
Right now, under the overall investigation plan, the thought is this subsurface flow is toward the river. That's where things are headed. And as I mentioned, these are compounds that are heavier than water. And so rain events, they don't cause it to upwell from the bottom of an aquifer, but what happens is you end up with a lot of rainwater on top of it, diluting it out. But
the Wabash is on the other side. The old Tay River system.
Oh, the Tays River Valley, yeah.
It's under there.
Uh-huh.
If that's the Wabash Valley, really, the whole thing.
That's what caused the Wabash to be in the location it's in, because it is a part of the Tays River outwash system.
It's an amazing.
It is. It's really cool.
But really, if you understand it, you go, oh my God, what did they do? Well, they didn't know about that, I'll tell you that. That's the way it was.
Yes.
Okay, I have a question about the water.
Uh-huh.
The water inside of the factory, a lot of people have said that they drank it, had upset stomachs, headaches, all of that, and then once they stopped drinking it, it all went away.
Yeah, that was another one of my jobs. Had to go around change the water in the tanks. And they finally did get water in there for cups and all that for people to drink that instead of the basically city water. I mean, it was really weird. That should be in the report somewhere.
So they were on a city water supply. But what were the tanks you referred to?
Way back, they had plating for a long.
Water coolers?
And what they would do with plating is the water itself that had to be circulated through it, everything. They were using and saving money. We had a lot of spot welders, a lot of them. So they would just move that water into the spot welders to cool down the heat from the welding. And then, but that had to keep moving all the time. Well, where would the water go after that? Into the sewer. So all the plating chemicals was basically circulating through and going into the river. I was an inspector for quite a while. I figured that all out. And I came up and said, I'm not going to go ahead and okay anything anymore because this is insane. So, of course, they basically got not only rid of me, but they got rid of all the inspectors.
That's why people didn't speak up. They were afraid.
And I was talking about the drinking water in the factory.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Possible for those chemicals to permeate plumbing.
Not really, because
Not really or not at all?
I've never found, I mean, plumbing is a positive pressure system.
Yeah, so it pushes stuff
So
out.
things don't enter.
Okay, what if there's
And-
minute cracks?
And that's why you have well, then you have leaks. It pushes out through that leak. That's why you have boil water advisories when the water system's down or low pressure or they're working on it. Because that positive pressure is removed at that point, so it can't push contaminants out and contaminants can come in at that point. Now, part of it about piping, along with that, a lot of the older water pipes were copper. I've got copper in my house because I insisted it. Now they have PET and a few other plastics associated with it. If there is some compounds, solvent compounds, mainly in pure form, up against that pipe, it is possible that they could leach into it if these are plastic, certain types of plastic pipes. But right now, I've not investigated plumbing. I'm under the assumption they put all copper in because this is built way back. But it works under a positive pressure system, and that even if they were permeable, it pushes out rather than allows in. Yes.
Just
And then I'll get to this gentleman.
follow-up question. I know you're not a doctor, but on that note, you did mention the State Department of Health.
Yes.
They do have doctors. They do investigate cancer clusters in
Uh-huh.
the state, is that correct? Do you guys partner with them on these sites to investigate to see if there are correlations?
I have.
If not, why not?
Yeah. I've had discussions with Department of Health people where concerns are there for a cancer cluster. And that was a discussion that went on at sites across, some sites across the nation, is that there are specific guidelines that got changed under Trevor's Law, if I remember the name correctly. And in fact, I'm pretty sure I've got it correct. The way you look at it is, like I said, TCE, you're looking at bladder and kidney cancers primarily. What they do and what people were wanting to do is look at all cancers across the board. And the toxicologists and health professionals out there, TCE is not known to do that. And so, therefore, we shouldn't lump these to be a cluster.
I just want to say that TCE,
there are other things.
Acute exposures cause severe liver destruction, and chronic effects include a variety of cancers, but also liver in addition to that. And headaches, tremors, dizziness, gastrointestinal pain, nausea, loss of appetite.
And is that from the CDC?
Yeah, these are from, EPA sheets. We've compiled a number of chemicals with some of the uses of the products and health effects. I'm happy to share these sheets with anyone. They're a draft sheet, so we haven't fully checked all of the spelling, but we can say that the information on them is correct and the sources are.
Yeah, as long as you got the sources on there, that's very important.
Yep.
But you do partner with the health department?
Oh yeah, I've had discussions with them. Say, there are concerns here. You're probably going to get contacted from someone or a group wanting to know information about that. But I don't do that evaluation. It's like.
But you guys collaborate to work together to help solve these issues for the future?
And yes, from the environmental standpoint we do, from the health standpoint, they're looking at it. Because that's their job.
Don't feel that way about it.
Ohio's got a different setup than we have. They, for their environmental investigation remediation, those are all hired contractors that the state oversees. It's a totally different situation. So we do try to work with, and we consider them partners at the Department of Health, as well as several other agencies should something cross over into their realm in the way they deal with things. But I'd like to know what their findings are.
If I could just throw this out there to everyone here, privatization of public things is what gets you independent private contractors that the state then has to hire, rather than having our own experts like these. And this is why we need people like this in the state of Indiana.
For cancer cluster evaluations, the Department of Health also utilizes people at EPA and the CDC. Motria Caudle from the CDC, who works for EPA and the CDC, she has done several cancer cluster evaluations around the state. To date, I am not aware of any cancer clusters, but like I said, I'm not the health person.
What was her name again?
Motria Caudle. Now, there's more than just one person, but that's the person I have worked with in the past. You had mentioned Martinsville. She is working on Martinsville. Okay, she's worked on some others that are out there. So, but that's the person I've talked to and had discussions with, and she's been at meetings before. Very nice person, very knowledgeable. Yeah.
Going back to when they used to have the drains hooked up to the sewers, I used to watch it, the water come out of the water fountain like that high where it blew back.
And that's bizarre. Oh, you mean through the discharge drain?
Come back up through the drain.
Yeah. And
So you had all that
yeah,
nasty stuff.
there may have
up
been a
there, too.
clog, and then back. Yeah.
Now, your water flow, just the way the water flows from Square D,
Uh-huh.
you're only focusing on that one hot spot there?
Uh-huh.
Or how far out are you going?
We'll keep going until we don't find.
Till we find the end of it.
We're gonna.
But you don't have an estimate.
But we held this meeting now because you guys wanted information.
Right.
If we could have waited till they found all that stuff out, and then we could have told you. But you needed information now, so we held the meeting now. And so they're still investigating, and bedrock wells are going to be going
So
in.
you're testing, how far have you tested out so far? Like those deep reds?
Right to here. Here and here.
Just the other side of the railroad tracks.
Yep. And they've done some borings out in here. So
What are the top ones to the far right?
here,
Yes.
those are sewer evaluation. Schneider has done, through their consultant, sewer evaluations because the sewers could be a conduit for subsurface groundwater vapor, as well as you guys were saying there was disposal done within the sewers. If there are any residual contaminants within the sewer, within its backfill, they're sampling the sewers to determine if that is contaminated and it would have gone outside the area of the groundwater plume. They've done, they were in their second round. Their first round, they did a handheld meter. It's called a Frogger. You can stick it in there, and it will tell you to the parts per billion level of what is in that sewer or whatever you're sampling with that Frogger. Okay? Our emergency response units use those when they go out on accidents. They're following that up with the gold standard, which are SUMA canisters, which are the gold basketball-shaped things. Sometimes they're shaped like that, except they're smooth. There's no juts out. They're just a little canister. So they had done a bunch of SUMAs on here. We don't have the data. We don't have the reports on those. So once we get them. So we're trying to do this as we're going. Yes?
How quickly are they testing? Like when you drive around now, you really don't see anything going on. I mean, how quickly do we have their contractors out testing?
So they kind of, they put in new borings, they collect those, they get to the lab, and then, based on that, they design what the next step would be. So there is kind of this iterative process. When they go out, they collect a bunch of information, then we kind of look at it. They should include us in the loop too. And we get a look at it, and we say, well, maybe you should do more over here. And then they go back out in the field and do more. So it is kind of...
We are on several addendums right now on work that was to be done. Like I said early on, they were just looking at a couple of homes. They've expanded it out based upon that early iteration they completed and said, no, we really need to look at this area because they had more groundwater data. Say, oh, no, it goes out a little farther than we thought. So that's where that's at. Anybody?
Isn't there a limited time frame? Like, isn't there like a 2-year time frame?
Right, we are trying to...
That's what is optimal.
Now, it turns out it's longer than we thought or something, or it took a different direction. I mean, it's possible it could take longer, but...
Or deep and hard to investigate.
Our job right here, Chelsea and I, is to make sure that we think they're doing what they need to as fast as they need to.
I think everybody here would agree, we'd appreciate any more of those, I can't remember the name of it now, the
Split
stage.
samples?
The split samples,
Okay.
because that keeps them honest. You do one time, everything's good. I'm sorry, they are going to do what's in their best interest. It's not to say that they're gonna shade things, but let's make sure they don't.
It's an international company that's doing the sampling that's not affiliated with them, so I mean, they would like ruin their own. But I understand what you're saying, and we certainly can't do that.
Exactly.
When did you guys start working with Square-D?
It came in December of 21, and they signed their agreement in February of 22. So actively for a year.
An inspection email or letter written by a Mr. Stapinski. He's a representative of the office. And it says here that 3 distinct discharges were discharging onto and being absorbed by the ground. They were noted at the rear of the facility. and that these discharges consisted of a biodegradable wash water utilized for parts cleaning, paint, spray booth wash water, and wash basin wastewater. And then it says, due to the potential threat to the groundwater aquifers in the area, this method of wastewater disposal must be eliminated. It is suggested that the company contact the city of Peru to obtain approval to discharge these wastewaters to the municipal sewer system. And then it also talks about how, I think it was Schneider at the time,
How old is this?
Well, yeah,
This was from 1978.
has
78?
been regulating it
Yeah.
for a long time, right? So when these wastes had to be regulated in the 70s, we started inspecting them, there would be reports. So IDEM as an agency has been out there for,
And the State Board of Health prior to
50
IDEM.
years probably.
Yeah.
But this part of it, voluntary remediation, is much more recent.
But it's still there. That stuff is still gonna
Right,
be there.
there's-
Right. And the investigation will pick up those compounds because we're broadly analyzing for things early on and then narrowing down to what we find.
And I mean, I assume back then they had to scrape it up or something, or it sounds like a surface release.
No, it
They just
absorbed
let
into
it
the
go.
ground.
They said it was.
They poured
In the
stuff down
70s?
the ground.
Yeah,
Quite possible,
After that, they had an
and
unlicensed-
probably quite legal.
They had an unlicensed tanker come in, and then they dumped it somewhere else. It says in that letter.
So you were talking about, I'm sorry, were you gonna say something?
No.
You were talking about the limestone, I just have a question.
Mhm.
Because it is, I mean, this whole city pretty much, I know out where we live, there's a lot of limestone, not as much as Bedford.
That's all the bedrock within in Indiana's limestone, your shale. That's the other
Yeah,
one.
okay. So, and then I want to understand, you were talking about it leaking, like with the sand and stuff. So if the bedrock is solid with no
Cracks or.
cracks,
Right.
thank you, it just sits there and backs up?
No, it's going downhill. 'Cause
But,
the-
I mean, when
your
you get
bedrock
5 inches of
tips
rain or 4 inches of
towards-
rain or something, is it gonna back up and then it's gonna go? not-
It's going to find the easiest route of flow. So it'll either go out and stay above the limestone, or it'll find that crack to flow through. But those cracks can only support so much flow in them. If you've got a crack this thick, you're not going to be able to push 500 or 1,000 or 10,000 gallons through it. It's going to stay in the unconsolidated material and flow through the sand because the sand is far less permeable than the bedrock
Yeah, most
is.
of it's not, I mean, the bedrock's 20 feet down, so most of it is not gonna get, you know, I mean, only part of it.
Peru is like a dip anyway. I mean,
Right.
everything's gonna collect.
Most
on
of
it.
it's running towards
I mean,
the
you know,
river, right?
they always said a tornado gets in here, you know, for every year.
Well, take a look at that 86 map, it's called a bird's eye view, and type in bird's eye, Peru, and it'll pop up. It's Library of Congress. It's really cool. I eat this stuff, you know, like those maps. I love old maps. I like topo maps, topography maps.
Well, we're
Yes.
getting close to 7:30, and certainly so I know that if there are further questions, certainly contact my office, contact IDEM. We'll get those answered. We'll certainly be watching as this process goes forward. And as we've heard tonight, it's their job and IDEM's job to make sure that Schneider's doing what they have to do to take care of this problem. And we're all paying attention, and we're going to make sure that that happens. So thank you all so much again for being here, and look forward to having more conversation on the issue. Thank you.